Goldenseal and Ginseng one.
Did you just throw a cat through the house, or?
I did. Cat hates me except when I don't want it around.
I thought that's either a pin with a very long plume on it, in which case you're far more eccentric than I realized, or you just knocked a long-tailed fuzzy cat off the desk.
The cat barbers are actually closed, and so therefore he couldn't keep his cat there, I guess. Got to get it out of the way.
Looks like we got a couple of minutes.
Hey, Dennis and Aaron and Woody and Bowles family, Chris and Paxton. Welcome.
Can you hear me now, Phil?
Yes.
Okay. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing very well. Appreciate it.
I like that Hotel California cover. That was good.
Oh, thank you, Phil. I tell you, I'm working on Sweet Baby James right now, but I don't know when it'll be ready. I've always played it with just 3 chords, but James Taylor uses about 6 or 7, and that's really what it takes to make it sound good.
I didn't know there were more than 3 chords. That's all I ever learned.
Well, you're throwing in F sharp minors and B flat minors and stuff I've never played.
Huh.
What is it? G, C, and D? Is that what everything else is usually in?
Yeah, G, C, and D, or E, A, and D.
I'll send you a link, Dennis, after this. A guitarist I found on YouTube that you might like.
Okay. All right.
Well, before we get started, while you're checking in here, if you'll go ahead and put your names, and whoever's there, if you'll put your name there with you, put your names in the chat box. We'd appreciate it.
Have to hit enter or anything? Let's see. I guess I should put where I'm from up here.
What did you call that mushroom? Pheasant what?
Pheasant back or dryad saddle are 2 of the common names for that one, I believe.
Looks like everybody's into hunting the dryland fish this year.
It seems to. So we've had a couple good years in a row, I think.
Yeah, but I didn't know. Dwayne Farthing, you remember him?
No.
He was county agent in Wythe County a few years back, and but he cautioned somebody that there were 2 types, that one of them can make people sick, or make some people sick. A white one and a brown one. And the brown one was could make you sick.
I've heard that about the halfback. It's a different genus, and but I've eaten it. It hasn't caused me any trouble.
Oh, okay.
I've actually got some. I found a few today, and 2 halfbacks.
I found a darker one today myself.
These were all the yellows. Other than those 2 halfbacks, everything we found was yellow.
See, Virginia Extension was working today. Y'all were hunting mushroom.
It was a mushroom foraging workshop, Mr. Meeks.
Okay. Okay. Well, that'll count.
We're still doing field trips in Kentucky, see.
Mine was called annual leave, and I just so happened to run across it and picked it up and packed it out.
I figure I've given them enough evenings with these Zoom meetings that I could stand to go mushrooming for a couple hours. So, and trust me, I was on the job. My phone was ringing nonstop the whole time. So I'm not sure how much of a break that was.
Doesn't sound like much of one.
Mine couldn't ring where I was.
You leave it at the house like a smart man?
No, I had it with me. It can't ring where it's at. You got to have signal for it to ring.
Yeah, it's getting harder to find those places over here. Well, I've got 6:03. If you all are ready, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start off with the Goldenseal presentation, and the second half will be Phil on the ginseng. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Goldenseal, but this is probably the second most valuable woodland herb in our region. And it's a fair amount more abundant than the ginseng is. They have very similar growing requirements. Goldenseal prefers a very rich, well-drained soil. It likes it to be roughly neutral, and it can tolerate a little more sun than the ginseng, but it still likes it to be about 60 to 70% shade. If you expose it to more sunlight than that, a lot of times you will see leaf scald on it, and it just doesn't thrive. It also likes mulch for winter protection because it's got a root that is very close to the surface of the ground, and it can be exposed to those freezing temperatures that kind of burn the root back. It's seen as a really good rotation crop if you're growing ginseng commercially to sell. It's in a totally different family, so any pathogens that are in the soil from the ginseng will be starved out when you plant the Goldenseal. And if you didn't realize it, that's really why we recommend rotations, is because of the pathogen buildup. And if you rotate out of the family into a different family, you slowly starve those pathogens down. So that's true for gardening, and it's also true for this. And one other benefit to the Goldenseal is, unlike ginseng, which is very heavily poached by folks that trespass, most of the time they will pass Goldenseal up, partly because of the price difference. They just don't pay it as much attention. This plant has a lot of historic use. It was used by early Americans as an antiseptic, and it does have antibacterial and antiviral properties. They used it as a snake bite treatment and eye wash for sore eyes, and they used it for a lot of skin diseases and that kind of thing. It's also been used as an insect repellent, as a diuretic, so it makes you urinate. It's also supposed to be a stimulant. And obviously, if you've never seen the root of it before, it's extremely yellow, very vibrantly yellow, which is where it gets its second name, which is maybe more common around here as yellow root. But it was used for dyes and paints and clothing and that kind of thing. These days, it's used primarily as a dietary supplement, and it's thought to aid the immune system and help with inflammation. My own family has used it for generations for diarrhea and any kind of a stomach problem. And I don't know if you all have ever heard of Fiddling Kenny Baker, but his son, Kenny Jr., is a good friend of my uncle's, and they turkey hunt together a lot. And he was on a turkey hunt several years back and had a stomach problem and diarrhea, and my uncle just happened to have some growing at the farm, and they dug some up, and he made a tea out of it, and he said it was almost immediate that the diarrhea quit. So a lot of people feel like it's got potential in cancer treatment, and the nasal congestion, that gets back to the anti-inflammatory thing. It's even been used in the treatment of AIDS. And I'm assuming that's because of the immune boosting properties. There are 3 different chemicals in it, and I'm going to try not to bore you too much with this part of it, but hydroxystein, berberine, and cannadine. And it's the berberine that has been shown to inhibit the parasites and to kill tumors. And if you've ever seen burning bush, which is an ornamental that you can, I think you can still, or I'm sorry, barberry. You could still get this one at Lowe's occasionally. They also have those yellow roots, and it has the same chemical in it, but it's linked to being a sedative, and so it's got a lot of different uses for that. A lot of people feel like that it boosts the attributes of other medicines. And so they will add Goldenseal to a regimen that they take with other things, and it's thought to have that synergistic effect, or to boost the effectiveness of those others. And for that reason, a lot of herbalists will take it together with echinacea. They feel like that those 2 things work especially well together for immune things, colds and such. So because of that, it's used for colds and upper respiratory infections. I can tell you that if I determine that I have come down with the COVID, I'm probably going to be taking some Goldenseal tea just to see if it has any positive effects. But it is supposed to help with upper respiratory infections. And obviously anything associated with that, your hay fevers and that kind of thing. It's thought to work for UTIs, which is interesting. Liver disorders, jaundice, gonorrhea, a bunch of different things. And I'm not attesting to any of this, but these are things that have been found in the literature. This was something, this presentation was put together by the university. So I'm not just winging this. This is all things that were in there already. You can use it on the skin for rashes and infections and itching and acne and all manner of things. It kind of reminds me of some of the Asian treatments that basically it's good for everything. As far as the plant itself, it can be reproduced by seed, by rhizome divisions, or by root pieces. The seed is kind of difficult. I think germination is a little sketchy. I've had best success with dividing up the rhizomes. And if you've never seen it, a good mature rhizome from a Goldenseal plant will be about as big as the palm of your hand. And so when one gets that big, you can take a knife and cut it up into chunks and plant that. And feel the picture that I sent you earlier. That was the result of rhizome divisions. I found some growing wild while looking for dry land fish, and that was the first time I had seen it growing in the immediate area where I live. And I didn't want to impact the population, but I did want to have a start from it. So I dug up 3 plants and brought those to my house. And the back of my house faces north, so it's pretty shaded. There's a dogwood tree that shades it. And I had it growing there for 4 or 5 years. And I dug it up to use some of it. And I wanted to try it for stomach problems, which I will tell you that it did work for me. But I divided up some of those root pieces, and I've gone from 3 plants to 20 plants, and that's with me using it as well. So if you do try to start your own, I would recommend harvesting as few as possible from the wild and using that wild as a start. But not to continuously harvest it, just get a few and then start your own and use it and divide it up for your use. You can also use the root pieces. This is the little small root hairs that come off of the rhizomes. I tried that, and so far none of those have come up. I'm not saying that they won't, but I think it will be slower to emerge just because they don't have the same vigor as the rhizome divisions would have. As far as what you need for those root pieces, you need to have at least a ½ inch of the rhizome to get it started. And you'll know that it's the Goldenseal because it has the bright yellow color, and it'll have a lot of fibrous little rootlets that come off the side. It's not uncommon the way it grows to have a lot of mulch and dirt that kind of get grown up into the root itself. So don't be surprised if you discover that when you harvest it, that you need to break it open and clean that dirt or those pieces of mulch and things out of it. The best time to plant it is in the fall, and this is when it starts to die down, and that would be October to November. If you know you've got Goldenseal, you can actually find the plants all through the winter. The stem and the part of the leaf will persist through the winter, but it's best to do it after it turns yellow. It'll turn a bright yellow, the leaf will, and you can just dig it up and divide it and then replant those divisions. Second best choice is in February and March, and this is like most things. If you plant it in the fall, it has all winter for those roots to get established and to send up growth in the spring. If you do it in the springtime, it has less of a chance to get established, and so that's why it's the second choice. So it emerges from little buds in the spring, and you'll see kind of that crook-necked stem that will start to emerge. And after that comes up, the leaf pops up and starts to grow. The bloom is very early. Mine that came up has already bloomed, believe it or not. And this is usually late April. I believe mine was already beginning to bloom the first week of April. So I know we're running really early this year, but it blooms almost as soon as it comes up. And it'll be kind of deeply veined when it first emerges. It kind of puts me in mind a little bit of a maple leaf. I don't know if you can see that comparison, but it looks a lot like a sugar maple leaf when it first comes up. It's kind of got 5 divisions to it. So eventually those blooms will turn to a little red raspberry looking fruit. And part of the reason why it can be difficult to propagate from the fruit, other than the germination, is the fact that birds like to take these things and make off with them. And almost every year that I have had fruit on mine here at the house, the birds have helped themselves. So I'm just trusting that they are depositing that somewhere in the woods, hopefully, and not out in the fields. But these fruit usually come on in July and August, and they will have about 10 to 25 little small black seeds, and they're really tiny. That's another reason why it can be difficult to start with the seeds. If you do opt to use the seeds, they need to be planted about 1 inch deep and about 6 inches apart. And you can see this one emerging. I don't know if you guys are seeing my cursor or not, but you can see that little plant right in the middle. That is a seedling, and it looks nothing like the adult plant. That's just the cotyledons coming up from the seedling. So in the wild, usually it will form very large patches. Every time I've ever found this plant, it was growing in a big patch. And where I got mine from, my start, it was growing in a big patch. So the individual plants will continue to enlarge, and they do become root bound. So if you do this at home, that's another reason why you would want to divide it. They reach a maximum size, kind of like hostas or something, if you've ever grown hosta. And they need to be divided up because they don't get any bigger. So this can be absolutely the best way to get a good patch going. And it can take 3 to 4 years before those plants are big enough to divide. Don't be surprised by that. Usually after it gets to be about 3 years old, it'll have more than one stem come up. It'll have 2 or more, and these will be 10 to 14 inches tall, and they'll have a couple of leaves on them. And that's usually when you have an indication that you can divide it more. If you have a division that sends up 2 or 3 stems, you can dig that one up and divide it further. As far as the harvesting goes, you need to, if it's seed grown, you need to wait 4 to 5 years so that it's got time to get ample size. But usually you would harvest in late summer, early fall. Again, this would be close to the time when you're harvesting ginseng or when the leaves begin to turn yellow, and you're going to dry those rhizomes down. And you can also dry the tops down. Those sell as well. And usually the same folks that will buy the ginseng will also buy the Goldenseal. But you need to wash gently and save as many of those small rootlets as possible so that you're not losing the weight. And then air dry that 80 to 100 degrees until it's brittle. So it should snap a little bit and not bend. If it bends, it's not dry enough yet. And if you leave it that way, it can mold, just like the ginseng. So you want to go ahead and dry it until it's brittle. The prices for the root pieces are pretty high. Goldenseal, the price had gone down, and I feel like here lately it has been on the kind of the rise. At least it was on the rise until this thing hit. I'm assuming that this is actually going to work out for the benefit of Goldenseal because it's linked to immunity boosting. But the prices had been roughly around $8 or so a pound, which is quite a bit less than ginseng, but this is a lot easier to grow. And and it's got a lot of other uses. I grow it not so much for selling, but as for my own personal use. And I believe that is probably what most people would have an interest in, but you can sell it. We've already gone through a lot of this. It says to avoid using all of a wild source, and that's kind of what I hinted at earlier. Don't try to dig it all up and start your own patch. Just dig a few of them, get a start, and then leave the rest of those alone. Let's see. The market has been volatile, and a lot of this has to do with what the commercial demand is, and that's kind of up and down. And you can grow this commercially, but and part of the reason is it's less finicky than ginseng in regards to the growing conditions. It says that it's currently $30 to $40 a pound. The last time I looked, it was down to $8, and that speaks to that volatility. It's kind of all over the place. If you can get $40 a pound out of it, that's actually a pretty good price. It doesn't take a lot of Goldenseal roots to get a pound. So, that's not a bad thing. That's way more than you would get out of most garden crops. This is something that can be grown kind of wood simulated, just like the ginseng is, or you can grow it in a field under shade fabric. And so this would be something that would be a good option possibly for a portion of a high tunnel, or maybe just some part of the garden that is too shady for other type garden plants. That's what I used it for in my yard. The back of my house shades a flower bed too much, and so I put Goldenseal in for that reason. Organic is definitely the way to go if you're going to do it commercially, because people think organic is the end all be all. And I don't want to get into a debate about that with you guys, but to me, if you're a producer and you can get a better price by being organic certified, I would say if it's financially worth it to you, by all means, go for it. Whether or not that's actually an issue in Goldenseal, I don't know of anybody that is producing Goldenseal that isn't growing it organically. They just haven't become certified, but that is the way almost everybody grows it. It doesn't really have a lot of pathogens or pests that bother it. And slugs are really the only thing I've ever seen on mine. They like to feed on the leaves. just like they do if you try to grow ginseng. You know, I've had issues with voles and with slugs, and those are really the only two things that have bothered me here at home. There are online buyers. You can buy it or sell it by contract, and there are handouts. The best handouts really come from NC State, and if you're looking for a good source, Jeremy, I don't know if you've got time to pull those up, but NC State is a great source of publications for ginseng and Goldenseal. Virginia Tech actually has a very good ginseng publication, which I'm sure Phil will refer to, but I don't know if they've got Goldenseal. I've not seen that one. So don't be part of the problem. That we want to make sure that we're doing this sustainably. And it's just like ginseng, it's been over harvested in the wild. We don't want you to be part of the problem, be part of the solution. Don't overdo it. And plant in places that you can manage and only harvest a third or less of your stand after maturity. And that way you make sure that you've always got an annual harvest and that you can harvest it indefinitely. And if you do it every 3 years, if you only do a third and you're dividing the rhizomes every year from the ones that remain, then you should be able to harvest this annually and maintain a good stand. There's my contact information. We do actually have publications on this that we can mail to you if you're interested. We can send them to you, or you can look them up online. Jeremy's probably going to post the link. If he doesn't, I'll track it down while Phil's talking. And Phil, that's all I've got. So the rest of it is going to be left to you to tell them how to make money.
All right.
Phil, can I ask Chad a question real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, on the Goldenseal, my dad raised it for years along with ginseng, and the woods on the home place were, well, he had probably a couple of acres of Goldenseal, and the last time it was harvested was like 17 years ago. But I sold timber about 3 years ago, and all the brush and everything fell down on the Goldenseal. Will the roots rot if the tops can't grow, or will they still be there?
I would say they are still there. It's a pretty resilient plant. I've seen the same thing happen with ginseng, actually. A ginseng that was growing in a clear cut, and it managed to survive the clear cut and come back even bigger. And we found that growing in thickets. And so I wouldn't be a bit surprised that where my Goldenseal's growing is really only shaded by one little dogwood tree and the back of my house. So if you can grow hostas, you can grow Goldenseal. I would go back in there and look, and I would say every bit of that is ready to harvest or divide up.
Okay, thank you.
You might have all kinds of things to do during this Corona lockdown.
Yeah, the trouble is I can't get to the farm, or I haven't. I'm 2.5 hours away from it, and I just haven't gone.
Well, good luck with that.
All right, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Shad before we launch into ginseng? All right, we'll talk a little bit about ginseng, and a lot of people, you've probably seen ginseng at some point, even if you didn't know what it was. It looks pretty similar. If you're caught off guard and if you haven't seen a lot of it, it looks very similar to maybe Virginia creeper, sometimes blackberries. It has that same type of leaf arrangement. When we talk about ginseng, there are about a half dozen species worldwide that are referred to as ginseng. And there are only 2 species that are grown commercially. And one of those is the Asian ginseng, Panax ginseng. That's the one that started it all, got the interest really going well before the United States came into the game. The American ginseng, Panax quinquefolius, that's the one that we have here in the mountains. I used to run across it a lot more often than I do. I still run across it several times throughout the summer, but I used to see it a lot more. But it does grow wild here, very, very distinct once you know what you're looking for. It's been used, the Panax ginseng, the Asian ginseng, it's been used in Chinese folk medicine for over 4,000 years. So there's a long history with its medicinal use. And the Chinese believe that the slower growing wild roots absorb more curative power from the forest floor, picks up a lot of those elements that are in the forest and pass that healing along. That's the belief that the Chinese have. There's also a dwarf ginseng that's in this part of the world, Panax trifolius, and I've seen a lot of it. I'll tell you where I used to see a bunch was over near Cumberland Falls State Park. It was growing all over the place. It's not used medicinally. I know a very, very small plant. It's about this big, but when you see it growing, sometimes you'll see it growing in pretty dense patches. But again, that one's not used medicinally. It's just too small. Ginseng is known as manroot. That's the Asian name for it. It means manroot, and that has to do with the shape of those roots. Lots of times you'll see the two legs and two arms and a head. It'll be shaped about like a doll. It'll look have a human form to it. There's an old philosophy called the doctrine of signatures, and that was just the belief that if you had a plant that looked like a particular body part, that plant was medicine for ailments of that body part. And some examples here in the doctrine of signatures: the hepatica here on the left. The hepatica leaf has 3 lobes, just like a human liver. And so people believed that hepatica was good for any kind of liver ailments. The next one here on the right, this is bloodroot. If you cut open the root, it's bright red, looks like human blood. So a lot of people would be of the belief that bloodroot could be used to treat ailments of the blood. Toothwort in the bottom, they say that the bloom looks like a tooth, and so that was used for toothaches and so forth. And so if you think about that doctrine of signatures and you look back at this ginseng root, you might begin to understand why it's so valuable, why it's so highly prized, because it looks like a human. And just like Shad was saying with the Goldenseal, it's traditionally used to treat a whole list of different ailments. And a lot of people would believe that it's the medicinal herb, something that can be used for a lot of different problems. This is where American ginseng occurs naturally, pretty much all over the eastern U.S. and Canada. You won't find it on the West Coast. You won't find it in Idaho, but you will find it all over the East, very wide range. And in Virginia, you pretty much find it everywhere except along the coast. So it's pretty widely distributed. The ecology of ginseng, it will normally pop out. It should be popping out now. I know Shad's seen it in his plantings. So even in the woods, it should be coming out now. It'll start to emerge. It's got a palmately compound leaf, and that's if you look at one of those prongs on ginseng, it takes that entire prong to count as a leaf, and all these individual pieces, those are leaflets. So we talk about ginseng having 2 prongs or 2 leaves. That's 2 of these prongs, each with anywhere from 3 to 5 leaflets. That's a palmately compound leaf. More leaves that it has, the more prongs that it has, the older the plant is typically. And again, we'll refer to those leaves as prongs when we're talking about this commercially. It takes about 5 to 10 years for a ginseng plant to reach maturity. It'll start out when it first emerges like this. Sometimes it'll have 3 leaflets, look like a lot of other things that you might see in the woods. The next year, you may have a single prong with 5 leaflets, or you may have 2 prongs that second year with 5 leaflets. And then it'll go to 2 or 3, and then it'll end up as a larger plant. 4 prongs. In some cases, you'll run across 5-prong ginseng. I think in Breaks Interstate Park, it seems like they have a 5-prong they've got preserved in one of the museum displays. Each plant is going to have about 60 to 100 seeds. If you think about that cluster of berries that we saw earlier, each of those berries will have 2 seeds in it, but each plant's going to produce maybe as many as 100 seeds. And seeds will germinate the second spring after ripening. So they get ripe this fall. They're not going to germinate for a full year till the second spring after they ripen. And ginseng is most easily recognized in the fall. If you're not familiar with how it looks, if you're not good at spotting it, it's a lot easier in the fall because it's going to have that bright red berry. You'll start to see that in August or September. And then shortly after that, you'll see those leaves start to turn yellow. And at that point, it stands out a little better. Just a drawing of the different parts of a ginseng plant. Again, this entire thing here with the 5 leaflets, that's a leaf or prong. Here's the berry cluster, it'll be right in the center. You'll have the rhizome here, the underground stem, and then you'll have the root. And the root can get pretty sizable in those older plants. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has done a study. They looked at the harvesting of ginseng, and what they determined is when you stick to the legalities, when it's a legal harvest, that doesn't endanger the species. So it's sustainable. Those laws, regulations that have been developed, it is a sustainable way to keep this plant going. It's not really in danger of being wiped from the face of the earth as long as they're harvested legally. But the problems that can impact it and threaten the particular species, of course, the big one is poaching. And poaching is the reason if somebody is considering growing ginseng commercially, that's the one thing that causes me to say, hey, maybe you want to think twice about it, because poaching can be a big problem. And I've heard stories of people who have built fences and locked gates around their ginseng patch, and somebody still cuts their way in and harvests that by the time it's ready to go to market. Habitat loss is another threat to ginseng. It likes to have deep, lush forest, and as that habitat's lost, of course, we're seeing less and less ginseng. Deer browse is a big one. Deer like to feed on ginseng and a lot of other things, but deer browse can put pressure on a stand of ginseng. On the federal level, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that regulates the harvesting of ginseng. And here's a close-up. You can see those berries a little closer, how it grows right in the center of those leaves. Wild and wild simulated ginseng, you heard Shad talk about wild simulated goldenseal, but wild simulated ginseng is regulated just like wild ginseng is. States are authorized to regulate harvest within their borders, and here in a bit I'll talk about the different regulations for both Virginia and Kentucky. There's no harvest allowed in any national parks in the U.S., and it will vary among national forests. Sometimes national forests will allow harvest of ginseng with a permit, but the ones that we have closest to us here in Virginia and Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky and Jefferson National Forest here in Virginia, there's no harvest of ginseng in either of those national forests. I think as recently as 2017, it was allowed in Daniel Boone National Forest, but not anymore. So talking about just the regulations that relate to Virginia, Virginia does classify ginseng as a threatened species. If you're going to sell and harvest wild and wild simulated ginseng, it has to be at least 5 years old. It has to have at least 4 stem scars, and these numbers that you see on this illustration, those are the stem scars. It'll develop one of those every year, and it must have at least 3 prongs. You are required to replant those seeds when you harvest a ginseng plant. You can harvest on private property from September 1st in Virginia to December 31st. So that's the starting period, September 1st. Now, if you're harvesting from your own land, and this is one of the ways the regulations differ between Virginia and Kentucky. In Virginia, if you own land and you're harvesting the ginseng from your own property, you can harvest year-round. The enforcement of ginseng regulation comes through the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, the game wardens, and other law enforcement. They're usually the ones that are going to regulate or take care of the regulations. And anybody who's buying ginseng, they have to be licensed with the Virginia Department of Ag and Consumer Services. So you can't just sell it to the person down the street. They do have to be licensed in order for you to sell your ginseng. So again, in Virginia, starts on September 1st, but you can harvest all the way through the end of the year, unless it's your own property, and then you can harvest from your own property year round. In Kentucky, the harvest season is September 1st to December 1st. And that's different. Virginia said we could go all the way through the end of the year, but it ends December 1st in Kentucky. There's a buying season that's defined by Kentucky regulations. September 15th is when they can start buying the dried ginseng, and that makes sense. If you harvest ginseng on September 1st, that allows a couple weeks for it to dry before that can be bought. They can start buying the green right away on September 1st, but the dry ginseng, they can buy it all the way through the end of March the following year. Another big difference is in Kentucky, the regulations do apply to your own private property as well. So even if you're harvesting from your own property in Kentucky, you still have to abide by the harvest season of September 1st to December 1st. Currently, there's no harvest in Kentucky from any state park, state forest, or federal property. That's not allowed in Kentucky at the moment. As far as what's harvested, is very similar to Virginia. Have to have 3 prongs with 5 leaflets on each prong before you can harvest that. And the berries, they're a little bit more specific with how the replanting happens. The berries have to be replanted within 50 feet of where you harvested, and you're planting those with no tool but your fingers. So you can't take a trowel or a shovel and make a trench and plant those seeds. You have to just pull back the soil, the leaves with your fingers, and that's how you plant those seeds, those berries. This is one that I didn't know until today, and I was researching this, but ginseng harvested in Kentucky cannot leave the state without a certificate that's issued by the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Now that would apply, for example, I live here in Virginia. If I go to my in-laws' place in Pike County and I harvest ginseng and I decide I want to bring that home to dry out to then resell it to a Kentucky buyer later on, I'm in violation of the regulation. So without a certificate, that can't cross state lines from Kentucky. You heard Shad make mention the different styles of growing the Goldenseal. Same kind of situation with the ginseng. There's field cultivated, there's wild simulated ginseng, there's woods grown ginseng. Site requirements: ginseng does have to have a moist, well-drained soil. Has to be a soil that's high in calcium. So just like with everything else, if you're going to do this commercially, it is a good idea to take the time to do a soil test. It needs to be high in organic matter, and usually if it's a forested site, it will be. It'll have a high organic matter content. A deep, dark soil, a loose soil with lots of leaf litter. And if you've ever spent time under big poplars and places like that, you can imagine the kind of soil that we're talking about, that when you dig your fingers into it, you pull back that loose leaf litter and you get to that really dark, rich soil. That's what ginseng prefers. It doesn't like waterlogged soil. It doesn't like compacted soil like you might find in a agricultural situation. Heavy soil is a no-no, and it doesn't like rock outcrops. So again, think about those tulip poplars and sugar maples and those types of sites. That's what ginseng prefers. A north or east facing slope is going to be ideal, and near the bottoms of the slopes, normally you're going to have a deeper, richer soil. This was a picture, and I'm not sure where this was, but it's a picture I found online of field cultivated ginseng. And you can see how thick that's grown, but you can also see the level of input that you're putting into this with the shade cloth and the cultivation that goes into this. Very labor intensive, very expensive method. And the thing is, you're not going to plant this year and harvest next year. You're going to have about 5 seasons of growth before you can eventually see a harvest. That shade is going to be required if you do this in a field. But you can look at yields of anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 dried pounds per acre. A site like you see in the illustration, that's roughly the kind of harvest that they're going to be shooting for. So a ton of dried ginseng per acre in this field cultivated scenario. The startup, again, looking at that picture, you can kind of see where the expense is going to come in, but you're probably going to be spending at least $40,000 an acre to start a field cultivated growing scenario. And that might make sense in some areas. I think we've got perfect conditions for doing the wild simulated, the woods grown ginseng here in our part of the world. But this is one option, the field cultivated. Woods grown, it uses the natural tree canopy, so you don't have to mess with the shade cloth and you don't have that expense. The woods grown may bring only half the price of wild ginseng and wild simulated. It does require some pretty intensive management, disease management, weeding that you have to come in and do. But you can see again in this forest floor how thick this ginseng is growing, so you can get a lot in a relatively small area. Takes a little bit longer with the woods grown ginseng. You're talking at least 6 seasons of growth before it's ready to harvest. The next one is wild simulated. It can yield anywhere from 100 to 600 pounds of dried root per acre. And the prices of wild simulated are going to be pretty similar to wild ginseng, purely wild ginseng. So you're going to get those astronomical prices that we'll talk about in a bit. You do need to have an open understory when you're looking for places to do the wild simulated. If you've got areas where you've got a lot of greenbrier or you've got a lot of other shrubs that are growing and coming up, that's not going to be a good scenario for the ginseng. It's probably not going to be shady enough. So you need to have a tall canopy. 25% sunlight is about all you want. And again, if you're seeing a lot of shrubs, if you walk into your woods and there are all kinds of shrubs in there, probably getting too much light for it to be very productive for wild simulated ginseng. Some example habitats, again, I mentioned this earlier. If you've got an area where sugar maple is growing, tulip poplar, that's going to tell you that's going to be also a good place for the ginseng. Black walnut too. If you have a black walnut stand, ginseng is probably going to do just fine. And there are indicator species with when it comes to selecting a site for wild simulated ginseng. If you go into your woods and you see a lot of jack in the pulpit, if you see mayapple, trillium, and bloodroot, then that's a pretty good indication that it will also support ginseng on those slopes and in those soils. This was from the Virginia publication that Shad mentioned, and this is kind of old now. We're talking over 20 years old, but a comment was made that in 1999, wild dried roots of ginseng sold for as much as $4.25 a pound. And at that point, the price had doubled from 1989 to 1999. That same year, there were a lot of field cultivated ginseng roots sold that were produced under artificial shade, like that one picture I showed you. Those sold for $10 a pound, and that price had been reduced over that same 10-year period. Now that $4.25, that's not anything you want to write down in stone, because it's been all over the place. I've heard $500, $600, $700, $800 from one year to the next. So it can be pretty expensive, but then other years it'll drop. But like Shad, I would think this entire COVID-19 situation where people are looking for more traditional herbal remedies, I would believe that in the long run, that is going to help the ginseng market. This picture here was also taken from the Virginia publication, and you all can message me if you would like a copy of that. I'll send you a PDF. It talks about some of the example inputs and some of the example profits that you might see. I hesitate about even putting this in the slide, but $44,000 per acre is possible. That's not very likely, but if all the cosmic tumblers clicked and everything lined up and everything worked like it should, then that would be a possibility to get a revenue of 44,000 an acre. But then things like weather patterns and wildlife browsing and habitat suitability and labor are all going to be factors. Poaching, again, that's the one factor that I use very often to talk people out of the whole idea of growing ginseng as a crop, because poaching can be a major problem. I know I've known some people personally who would, if they borrowed your ink pen, they'd grieve themselves to death if they didn't get it back to you. But then they'll wander right into your woods and help themselves to the ginseng and Goldenseal and other things. And then the markets, the markets are going to be up and down just like with anything else. When it comes to seeds, there are some sources of seeds online. You can order seeds, and usually if you order a pound of seeds, you're talking about 6, 7, 8,000 seeds in a pound of ginseng seeds. It's normally going to cost you anywhere from $60 to $220 for a pound of seed. If you don't go with a reputable seed source, you're not going to get as good a germination as you could, because those seeds have to be stratified to get good germination. And you don't want to plant imported seeds, because that can be harmful to the native populations. Like Shad was saying, sustainable harvest, sustainable management is going to be the key. The viable seeds, generally they're going to be firm and they're going to be off-white to dark brown. Sometimes there'll be tiny white tendrils that'll show. And the best you can hope for usually is going to be about 70% germination. So if you're getting 70% germination from the seed you bought, you're going to be doing pretty good. And then the best time to plant, if you order seeds, just going to be like if you're harvesting, you're going to be harvesting in September and October. So the best time to plant is going to be October, November is the ideal time. And I'm going to stop the share right now. I saw several comments come up in the chat box. Okay, looks like a lot of those were the publications that Jeremy put in. So thank you, Jeremy, for including those. And Shad put in the Virginia Tech publication. There's a link to that.
Phil, I was going to make the comment about the seed source. I don't know if there's any truth to it or not. I've heard the same thing that you have, but I know a lot of the seed suppliers are up in Wisconsin. I don't know why Wisconsin became such the hotbed for ginseng, but that's where a lot of the seed comes from. And from what I was told, a lot of that ginseng did not originate in Wisconsin to begin with. It came from plants that were taken there from Kentucky. And so the argument is that that's still good for us if we order it from Wisconsin, because it's actually our ginseng coming home anyway. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that.
I've heard the same thing. In fact, I know a couple of years ago, we had a researcher with Virginia Tech who was looking at doing some ginseng studies, and they wanted locally sourced seed. And of course, that was nearly impossible to find. They were finding a lot of Wisconsin suppliers. And I think what they determined, the same thing, is that a lot of that had originally come from the Southern Appalachians.
I've got a supplier that is, my uncle has dealt with him, and we've dealt with him for several years. And we have been able to get our ginseng seed for about $10 a pound, if you can believe that. And I think your slide had it for 60, and usually that's what the price is, but we've been able to get it for around 10, and we've always had really good germination with it. So if anybody's interested, you can contact me, and we order that here at the office in the fall. And that's usually people will ask for a pound, and
Right.
so you're
Yeah.
not out very much if it doesn't work, but you can try it, and that's what I grow, and I've had good luck with it.
Absolutely. And Woody had asked the difference between wild simulated and forest grown. Forest grown, you're still growing it in beds. You're going to be doing the cultivation with equipment, planting that in rows and dense beds. With wild simulated, you're just going to imagine the same way that it would grow naturally. You're going to just have patches of it. You're going to pull back the leaves. You're going to broadcast the seed and cover it back over with your hand. So they're just going to be scattered patches in the wild simulated. But forest grown is really sort of similar to the field grown, except that you're not going to be using the shade cloth. You're not going to be required to do that, and maybe not quite as dense as the field grown, but still going to be grown in beds.
Feel part of the reason why they know how it's been produced is the growth habit. It's kind of like a carrot, and if it is bed grown, it tends to be smooth. If they're familiar with ginseng, it's got those little wrinkles up the root, which I think you could see that in the picture that you showed.
Right.
Dr.
Right.
Jones used to have a picture of some of the cultivated, and it doesn't have that. It grows so fast that it's just slick. And so when they get that, they know what they're dealing with. So when you grow it wood simulated, it's going to have all those little rings. They want it to grow slow, and I believe that's a mystical thing. They believe that if it grows slow, that it somehow the environment imbibes it with special qualities, and it's kind of a mysticism thing, but it matters to them, and they'll pay for it.
Yeah. I know my wife's grandfather over in Pikeville would collect and sell ginseng. He would sell it up in Paintsville, and he would tell the story lots about somebody bringing in some forest grown ginseng, some cultivated ginseng, and the buyer wasn't interested in it. And he always talked about having a pink hue, but I think not necessarily the pink hue. I think just where it didn't have those annual scars. I think it just had a different color and a different look to it. Dennis was asked, can you sow seeds, or do you need to cover? You do need to pull at least just by hand, pull that leaf litter over them. Wouldn't use any kind of tools. You don't want to go too deep, but normally you just pull back the leaf litter, broadcast your seeds, and then push the leaf litter back over.
Phil, I've got a collapsible leaf rake that I got through Amazon that it just folds up. And when I go in to sow mine, I've got places that I sneak in and plant it just for fun, kind of like Johnny Appleseed. And I use that rake, and I just rake a little row down, broadcast the seed, and then just cover put the leaves back over top of it. And that's how we've done it. Any place I've grown it, that's how we've done it. And we've gotten really good germination. So the problem is after it germinates, dealing with the people, the voles, the deer, slugs, all those things.
Right. All right. I think so. That's all the questions I saw. Any others for me or Shad regarding the ginseng or the Goldenseal? Dennis will know if I can get in on Shad's seed order. Yes, I think I can. I think they'll let me on this side of the border.
Yeah, I was going to comment, Phil. You made the crack that that there has to be a certificate if you take the ginseng out of Kentucky. In fairness, we have to have a certificate just to drive into Virginia. So we'll let you in on the order.
Okay, appreciate that. All right. Any Any last comments or questions? And if not, we'll bow out here in just a minute.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, guys. Good job. We'll see everybody tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. Small fruit production. Is that correct?
Yep, Dr. Strang. He's a great specialist. So if you're into horticulture, I know the Mullenses. This is the guy you need to get to know before he retires. This is his last year, so pick his brain. He's really, really good.
Definitely. Should be a good presentation tomorrow.
Thanks you all for the compliments.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. We enjoy having you all. Have a great evening.
Enjoy the sunset.
Yeah.